Welcome to another edition of the Five Star Zone. I'm your host, Rico Beard from the Big Ten Network. Harold Shelton joining us. Harold, Separation Saturday. Now we're going to find out who some of these teams are. It's a lot of teams sitting there at 3-0, 2-1. I don't know how good they are. I don't know how bad they are. I don't really know what to think about them. But the beauty of it is they're going to play each other, and we get a little sample of by the time the night is finally over, when MSU and USC is done, we'll know a little bit more about this conference. I think right now, cream of the crop, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon. After that, I couldn't tell you who the fourth best team is. I don't know if you know, but I don't. Is it Indiana? Is it Illinois? Guess what? They're going to be playing each other. Is it Nebraska? Is it Michigan? Guess what? They're playing each other. There's also a couple of other undefeated teams in USC and Michigan State. Is it one of them? Don't know. They're playing each other. So we're going to find out who the fourth team is, at least right now. So let's do a little bit of preview of week 4 in the Big Ten conference games, getting ready to really kick off for everybody else. Which game you want to start with?
I think Illinois-Indiana is just fascinating.
Right, let's go there. Indiana, look, Signetti took this team to the playoffs last year, and it's almost like Bielema said, okay, we're going to follow your blueprint, and we're going to be that surprise team, and we're going to go to the playoffs this year. And in my world, this one is kind of a de facto playoff game. It's an early playoff game where I think the winner probably can maybe earn a spot. The loser, depending on what they do later on in the year, maybe ended up playing in a lesser bowl game and not in a playoff game. Is that a fair assumption?
No, I think that's fair. Especially, I think the next 4 games for both of these teams are very important, starting with Saturday. Illinois, they got Indiana, as we know, but then they get USC at home the week after that, and they get a trip from Ohio State in mid-October, all within the next 4 games. And then Indiana, you go to Iowa next week, which is never an easy place to play. And then you go to Oregon as well. So that's your next 3, and including the Illinois game today. So Saturday. So we're going to find out a lot about both of those teams. The loser definitely has an uphill climb where you're trying not to lose 2 out of 3, maybe even 3 out of 4. But the winner, they get a big top 20 win, gives themselves some cushion if they do happen to lose one of those bigger games later on.
I mean, for like Illinois, you play Western Illinois, you play Duke, which I thought maybe it'll be a little closer game, but it wasn't. You played Western Michigan, you shut them out. MSU fans got the taste to see Western Michigan earlier. I don't know how good Bielema and Altmaier and all of those guys are, but they're doing the one thing you're supposed to do to bad teams. You're supposed to beat bad teams and let them know that they're bad teams. If I had to pick one right now, I guess I would lean towards Illinois, but games at Indiana, right?
Yep.
I don't know what should I be looking for in this game?
So I saw Indiana was favored. It seems like that line keeps moving toward Indiana, which I think is interesting. If it winds up being close, I want to see how Indiana responds, because if you think about how the Signetti era has gone so far, everything's a blowout. They either win big or they lose big. The only close game they had was the Michigan game last year where they were up 17, and then Michigan got it close and they were able to hold them off at the end by 3. Meanwhile, that's all Illinois likes to do in these bigger games, is play close games. You know, over the last 3 years, they got 10 one-possession wins, tied for the most in the country. So they're fine when they're in a game like that. I haven't seen Indiana in a game like that, especially with the new staff, new quarterback. Like, how is all of that going to go? So if the game is close and it's back and forth, like, which quarterback, which staff do you trust? When you need that 4-minute drive, you need a field goal, or you're down 4 and you need a touchdown. Like, which side do you trust more? And I would lean Illinois if it comes to that.
But which quarterback do you think would have the edge? Is it Altmaier just because he's been in here for a little bit longer than the Indiana QB?
Yeah, I think so. I think Mendoza, it took him a game to kind of get used to what Cignetti wants, but he's been great the last 2 games. But again, that's Kennesaw State, that's Indiana State, not exactly Murderer's Row, but I do think Indiana has more overall weapons. They're more explosive than Illinois, but I think Illinois is just more efficient. They rather just take up 5-6 minutes on the clock and get points, while Indiana could score in 2 or 3 plays. So I think part of it, too, is Indiana doesn't mind leaning on you, but then they can also pop a big play. Illinois seems to be more so, hey, we'll get 5 to 6 yards at a time. And if that's working, that keeps that explosive Indiana offense off the field. And I trust Altmaier a little more just because I've seen it, and I haven't seen it with Mendoza.
So Bielema, little old school Big Ten football, kind of going back to his days at Wisconsin. You control TOP, keep the other offense off on the sideline, and you just methodically wear down the defense.
Yeah, and they play bend but don't break, but they do a good job getting off the field with sacks. I know they're second in the country in turnover margin. They haven't given it up at all, and they forced 6. So we've seen Duke move the ball up and down the field on them, but yet when they got in the red zone, it was a pick, it was a fumble. And we saw it even with Western Michigan. They moved it a few times early, were able to keep them out of the end zone. So they've done a good job so far of allowing teams to move the ball, but stopping them before it gets too real. And I don't know if they could afford to do that against Indiana, but that's been the game plan that's worked for them so far.
I guess, look, I don't want to sell Indiana short, but I'm wondering how much of the home crowd advantage is going to be there. I mean, if this was basketball, I would say absolutely. Man, the 2 assembly halls are playing each other. Like, this is going to be something. Indiana football, could the crowd, yes, no? Do they know it's football season?
So I'll give them credit in that it seems like they're starting to get a home field advantage there. They're starting to sell all of these games out. Cignetti kind of called out the fan base last year, like, hey, we need you guys in these stadiums and, in these games for Nebraska and Michigan, like they had to, and Maryland last year. They all he had to get them going, had to give them a reason to come and to stay. And it seems like that message is caught on. And I mean, this is the biggest, you could argue this is the biggest home game they've had in almost 40 years. They haven't hosted a top 20 matchup since 1987. So, I mean, we're talking like very uncharted territory for this Indiana program. And, I'll be curious to see what it looks like, especially under the lights. Spotlight's definitely on them. This is a chance to make a statement as a program. Right.
So, yeah, that's something that I'm definitely anxious to see. Like I said, a lot of good Big Ten games this weekend. All right. Because I'm going to call the Michigan-Nebraska game the main game. So before we get to that, let's go to the game that's going to be the late night game. I thought maybe it would be a little bit earlier, but it's not. I mean, I was hoping it was earlier so I can get a chance to go out there to see it. I don't know if I'm able to make it out there now because I got to be back for Detroit Lions duty. But it's Michigan State on the road, flying out to LA to take on the USC Trojans. Both teams sitting there undefeated. But at least according to the Vegas spread, they're saying that these two teams are not equal. USC has a little number by their name. AP poll has them at 25. Michigan State beats Youngstown State. Game was at 10 points. Had a lot of injuries in the game. And now, USC in one of those delay games took forever. But thank God it did because I had enough time to get back and watch the second half of the Purdue USC game. They go on the road. They travel to the East Coast. They beat the Boilermakers at home. And now they're set up to take on the Spartans. Jonathan Smith taking his team out there. Aiden Childs going back home to L.A. What should we expect in this game?
Well, I think USC, so far in this 3-0 start, they're big play everything. They're big play on offense, big play on defense. We've seen, them take the top off the defense with the receiving group they got. They got a stable of running backs who are all fast on defense. They lead the country in sacks. We even saw the big fella get a pick 6 for them last week against Purdue. So everything about them screams big play. Lead the nation in yards per play. I think they lead the nation, or at least second in scoring. So it's going to be an uphill climb, but it's certainly not impossible. We saw Purdue move up and down the field, but kind of similar to Illinois, they bent but didn't break, and they got 3 red zone turnovers, returned one of them for a touchdown. Even offensively, they had to settle for a lot more field goals than they would have liked. That's why that game could have been in the 40s, maybe close to 50, but they kicked 4 field goals. So, as explosive as they are, there are still some holes there. I do wonder if Michigan State could put any pressure on the quarterback to try to get off the field on third down or force an errant throw.
What's the weaknesses for them?
Well, I do think that offensive line is still a little bit of an issue. I don't think they have a ton of depth there. I do think that I think they were rotating the walk-on in the interior. So they're not like an Ohio State offensive line. They're not like a Penn State offensive line or Oregon offensive line. I think you can get pressure on them, but they do have a mobile quarterback that can escape some of that. Again, we saw the pass defense. They gave up a ton of passing yards to Ryan Brown. Purdue had a lot of success moving the ball down the field, but bad decisions by the quarterback enable USC to get out of there with a win because they were able to force 3 turnovers. So Aiden Childs, if he gets some time, which Ryan Brown didn't have a ton of, but if he gets some time, guys should be open. Guys should be able to make the plays, but USC wants to turn you over. If you don't turn it over and you could take time off, longer drives, get 7 points, keep their offense off the field, I think you could be there at the end. Now, will they do that? We'll see.
I mean, we don't know if Nick Marsh is going to play in this game or not. I mean, obviously you want to have him in there, but I wonder, and look, hear me out. I know this is going to sound weird for you, Harold, and for people watching this, but I do wonder if not having Nick Marsh in there forces Aiden Childs to look at everybody else and spread the wealth a little bit more, if that makes sense. Yes, you want Marsh in the game, but if Marsh is not there, you saw all of a sudden last week, he realized, I got tight ends, and he utilized the play action, and he found guys that his tight ends wide open. I mean, is that something that, if Marsh doesn't play, could the tight end play work again for Michigan State? Because, look, they had a ton of injuries, and Marsh was the biggest one. I think Frazier, they said it's possible he could be game time. Now, it looks like they lost one of their old linemen for the year. They were rotating in 8 or 9, so maybe the rotation that they were doing against Western Michigan in the other games, maybe that will come to help them out. But, do they need Nick Marsh in order to pull this off, or is this something they can do without him?
I think you need him to win the game. I'd be surprised if he didn't play. Again, this is no inside sources or anything like that, but it seemed almost like more of a precaution when they kept him out. Like, he was standing on the sideline just fine. Like, I thought if it was a real issue, he would have maybe not been in uniform, been in street clothes, something like that, would have been in the medical tent, but I didn't see any of that. It seemed like there was a wrap, around the knee, and maybe they just said, you know what, we should be able to win this game without you. Let's just power it down, make sure you're good to go for next week. I'd be surprised if Frazier played. That looked worse, but then again, like, he was in a boot and he seemed to be walking fine. That one, I wouldn't mind if you held him out, especially since you got a bye a week after that, and then you go to Nebraska, give him 2 full weeks to recover. But I do think you need Marsh. USC, even though they give up a lot of yards, there's still a lot of athletes back there. And sometimes you just need a dude to go make a play. And I think he's your best guy to go do that. I was encouraged to see Jack Belling is still around and still making some plays. I hadn't seen much of that. So
he was the great hype. Like, I've yet to see what I was sold about him. I mean, Masuas is actually done better at tight end. But yeah, Velling all of a sudden started some doing things. And Omari Kelly, he's starting to become the king of the almost. The almost touchdown.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what he tripped over on that punt return. Like you juked out everybody, and then in the end, you just fell at the 2. Like,
Right.
okay. But I mean, he made the play, against Boston College. They're starting to get other people involved. Childs has just the one pick, and the one pick was actually just a tip pass.
Yeah, it wasn't
necessarily a bad throw, so I don't really count that against him. He's taking care of the ball. I just wonder, going back to LA, does he try to do too much? You're trying to really do something. And like you said, with USC's athletes, Harold, look, to me, I said for Michigan State to win as an 18.5-point underdog, almost a 3-touchdown underdog, everybody's saying that you can't. Now, we're going to get it. UCLA was also a double-digit favorite, and they got destroyed, which get their coach fired. We'll get into that in a minute. But I said for them, you got to be able to control the ball. If you can run, extend plays, keep USC on the sidelines, stop their big plays. And I think the biggest thing, you got to win the turnover battle. Because I was talking to somebody, I'm like, it can't be any my bads. Like if you're a DB and you get your hands on the ball, you got to catch it. You can't just knock it down. You got to catch it. If you sack the quarterback and the ball is falling, you got to pick it up, and you got to, you got to eliminate their drives. If you can do that, I think you give yourself a chance, because the longer this game goes and it's close, the more pressure is going to be on USC. But I think the worst thing that can happen is it ends up being like that Washington game a few years ago, where they went out to Washington and it was over.
Yep.
First quarter, I think Washington, they scored, and then State fumbles the kickoff, and then they scored, and then something else. I think it was a turnover, and then they scored.
Yep.
And it was ball game. And now you got everybody out there like, man, I got a 5-hour flight, and I flew all the way out here for this.
Right. Yeah, you definitely don't want that to happen again. And I think the biggest issue that Michigan State has had post D'Antonio is when they lose, they haven't even been close.
Yeah.
Like the losses have not even been remotely close. And I'm not
like Indiana. It's either but except when you lose, there's no heartbreaker. It's, you can pack your stuff up at halftime.
Yep. And we've seen too many of those. I know last year the Michigan game was close, but outside of that, Ohio State was a blowout. Oregon was a blowout. I mean, even Rutgers at the end of the year was a blowout. We've seen
Indiana
a lot of these. Indiana was a blowout. And so even going back to the Mel Tucker days, it was the same thing. Both of the Washington games were blowouts. And so when you get in these kind of games and you're trying to build, like, I think it's important, even if you don't win the game, you got to at least show you belong on the field. And there have been way too many times over the last 4 or 5 years where it hasn't looked like they belong on the field with a conference opponent or a power conference opponent in non-league play. And that's got to change. All
right, now the big game to me is the battle of the two most hyped quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Last year was Dylan Raiola. This year is Bryce Underwood. I don't know about either team. I guess Nebraska's coming there at 3-0. Michigan's 2-1. Michigan's had a test, and I guess you could look at it and say they failed. Nebraska had Cincinnati, neutral site, Kansas City earlier this year. They won, was it 17-10? So, I don't know what to expect out of this game. Biff Poggi he's the acting head coach. Kashron is out. He's serving the last of his suspension for this year. He still has one more game for next year. Matt Rule has yet to have that signature games in Nebraska. I don't know what to expect from either team. I think the Michigan, last I just looked, Michigan's a 1.5-point favorite. So I don't know where to go with this. To me, I don't know which quarterback does anything. Now, if Michigan, are they going to let Bryce be Bryce and do what they did last week against Central Michigan? And or do you go conservative the way you were in Oklahoma? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, I think just from the 30,000 foot view, this is a very, very important game for Nebraska. I think there have been so many times where we said, hey, Nebraska's back, or, Nebraska can't win a big game. Nebraska can't win a close game. Matt Rule in year 3, this is when he usually hits the 10 wins. We saw it at Baylor. We saw it at Temple. He's kind of exercised some previous program demons of, hey, you haven't had a winning season. Hey, you haven't won a bowl game. He was able to do both of those things. Then it was, you can't win a close game. So you win the close game against Cincinnati. You beat BC in a bowl game last year. Now it's, can you beat a ranked team? It's been 9 years since you beat a ranked team. You've lost 21 straight games against ranked teams. Like, win, if not now, then when for Nebraska. And in addition to that, their upcoming schedule after that is extremely favorable. So now you're talking about, if you win that game, you vault in the top 4 or 5 Big Ten conversation, potential 7-1, 8-0 start, and all of the buzz, all of the vibes, all of the juice is back in the program. But if you lose this game at home against a freshman quarterback, without their head coach, I think you lose a lot of that juice, a lot of those vibes, a lot of the feel good coming off of 3-0. I do think Michigan has the advantage up front. I think that defensive line is better than Nebraska's offensive line. I do think Nebraska's receivers are better than Michigan's DBs. So I think a lot of it is, can Raiola get the ball out on time? He's been very accurate since Dana Holgorsen took over as OC. Completing over 70% of his passes in 5 of the 6 games since Holgorsen took over. So he's been extremely accurate, been able to get the ball out. If they make him uncomfortable and he starts resorting to bad habits again, then I think Michigan can win this game. But I'm fascinated to see how it's going to look, especially with Bryce, because as we saw in Norman, training wheels were on. Last week against Central Michigan, training wheels seemed to be off. They actually ran them. The first 2 games, he had negative rushing yards, and then he goes for 114 against the Chips. So, was that just a one-off, or is this a sign of things to come?
Right, because I'm like, man, I guess this is going to come down to the quarterback play and which quarterback do I give the advantage to. I guess I got to lean towards Raiola with a year under his belt and being at home. Bryce, how well does he handle the road, the sea of red? Because, Nebraska is one of those places where they don't sell their tickets to the opposing fan base. It's like Ohio State. You're only going to get your allotted amount of tickets and maybe a smattering of other ones. But other than that, it's going to be red. It's going to be people against you, booing you, loud crowd noise. Don't really know what's going on with the Michigan offensive line either. But it's like, okay, do you take the training wheels off of Bryce? Because Nebraska, their rush defense is not that great, and you got Justice Hayes, so he can run the ball. Or do you have some design plays where you just kind of let Bryce run, and then hopefully if these work, you can then play action them to death? Like I said, I am fascinated by this one because I really don't know. I'm just going to sit back. I'm going to be that dude eating the popcorn meme. Like, I just want some entertainment. You can tell me either team's going to win. You can tell me either team's going to win close. You can tell me either team will win the blowout, and the answer would be yes. I can see every option because I don't know. Like I said, these are the 2 most hyped QBs, and now they ironically enough, they get to play each other, and we're going to see. Now, if for each team, who would be that special person that can get them over the top?
So I think for Nebraska is probably Emmett Johnson, the running back. They use him a lot in the backfield and as a receiver. He seems to kind of be Raiola's safety valve, and they try to get him the ball as much as possible in space. So I would say him for Nebraska. I think for Michigan, I'm curious to see if it's Marlon Klein. I saw that he was back against Central Michigan last week. Obviously missed the Oklahoma game. just seems like when things break down, it's always good to have a tight end that can
Right.
make a guy miss and move the chains. And I think that's what you need in a game like this. I don't think you can rely only on downfield throws or just throws by the line of scrimmage. You need some over the middle, 10, 12-yard pickups from a tight end, which has been Michigan's offense for the last couple of years. So I think I'd go Klein for Michigan and Emmett Johnson for Nebraska.
Does Michigan have a disadvantage because, unlike last week, Sharon Moore can't be around the program at all? So was he installing plays for this game and just kind of blowing off Central Michigan? Or, I mean, is that, I guess, yeah, are they just at a disadvantage because he's not there and he won't have any input at all this week?
You'd have to think so, right? I mean, obviously I wasn't at practice. I don't know what the install looked like Central Michigan week or how it's going around the program right now. But I would think not having your coach, not having like the full pulse of the program for over a week, especially going on the road in a game like this, would have to be somewhat of a disadvantage. Obviously they looked great last week, but again, he was around for the entire week up until Saturday, and it was an overmatched opponent. I would think it have to be some kind of disadvantage, and I would lean more Matt Rule at home against acting head coach in this situation, especially acting head coach who just came back to the program. So it's not like he was around for the last 5-6 years. He took a couple years off going to Charlotte and then came back. So yeah, I would think that would be advantage Nebraska there, but it's so hard to say.
All right, and then we had the first coach getting fired after 15 games. UCLA parts ways with Deshaun Foster. If you go back in time, I think we kind of saw this from his opening statement at Big Ten Media Days. He Did he get a fair shake at UCLA, or was he just a victim of circumstances?
Feels like victim of circumstances, and I think it's just the way that the team looked in the losses. Because I know they started slow last year, but they ended pretty well, winning 4 out of 6, and they won at Rutgers. They beat Iowa at home, so it looked like there was some kind of spark there, and the players seemed to respond to them. But it didn't seem that it carried over much at all going into this year. There's no shame in losing to Utah. Utah seems to be pretty good, but losing the way you did certainly didn't help. And then you go to UNLV, you're down 3 touchdowns early. Right. Then you come home to New Mexico, you're over a 2-touchdown favorite. You trail that whole game, and it gets away from you, and you lose by 25. It's hard to justify that. Again,
how much
I don't
of
know
this
what
was expectations because you got Nico Iamaleava and you paid a ton of money.
Yep.
But the irony is, it reminds me a lot of when Chip Kelly and it was Dante Moore, and it was like, that wasn't the quarterback I really recruited. You kind of bought this guy and forced me to play him, but this isn't the guy I really wanted to hitch my wagon to. Both coaches are gone after high-priced quarterbacks come there. How much of that is just expectation from UCLA and the fans and the boosters saying, hey, we just paid all this money to this QB. Why are we losing?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly could be part of it. Like, if you're, like, what's the return on investment there? Like, if you're paying however many millions of dollars to have this quarterback run your offense and you're scoring 10 points, twice, and, it took a second half for you to get to the 20s against UNLV, it's kind of like, hey, what are we doing here?
Right.
I do think that, he was starting to recruit well, but it wasn't necessarily in the image that he wanted it to be. Like, he, as a former running back, he wanted it to be a run first team. Obviously, having Nico, you couldn't really do that. And, it's hard to see a guy lose a job after 15 games, especially when he was kind of thrown in that position to begin with. The fact that he was hired in February, it wasn't like he had like a full recruiting cycle and full off season. He was kind of learning everything on the fly. Maybe they figured if they part ways now that gets them to the front of the line when it comes to coaching searches, and they're able to zero in on a guy instead of just stringing him along. So
and I see by parting with him, it's a catch-22 because the students that are there now, the athletes that are there now, it's not the fourth game. You could leave, you could sit out, you retain this year. But for those who stay, it's kind of unfair because it's like, wait. We may lose half our team, and I got to go to battle with guys who we shouldn't be going to battle with. So, look, there's no ever a good time to let somebody go but I guess if you UCLA, where do you go next? Because this isn't a school they're hemorrhaging money. So it ain't like you can go out there because people are like, hey, I saw Jonathan Smith's name on there. I'm like, okay, but I don't think they can match his salary. So, yeah, and his buyout because they don't have that much money. Where do they go? Is it just they go internal? I have no idea where they go next.
So I know you're in LA, but I think UCLA seems like a program that needs a program builder. You don't get a ton of fan support. You don't get the best. You don't get athletes.
Any fan support. Let's face it. Dozens of people will fill up the Rose Bowl.
Fair. That's fair. We saw that, on Friday night. And, knowing that the fan support is the way that it is, knowing that you share, your city with another school that's got more prestige than you, along with Oregon, who comes and takes a bunch of kids from LA, and Washington, who comes and takes a bunch of kids from LA. Like, I think you just need to find a program builder, a guy who's used to doing more with less, and less in this case could still be really good athletes in California. So I think you need to get someone who can coach offense, because there's always going to be quarterbacks that you can get. But it doesn't have to be necessarily a power four coach to me. If you can find a good Mountain West coach who can coach offense, I think that's probably the better way to go, especially with the money situation that you mentioned.
So an established head coach and not try to pick a coordinator, like try and go get the DC from USC.
Yeah, he certainly would be on the list, and he's got ties. I think that certainly helps. The fact that he's done it at multiple schools now. But when he was at UCLA, they had a top 5 defense in the country. So he clearly knows what he's doing, at least on that side of the ball. You never know what happens when you go from coordinator to head coach. It doesn't necessarily translate for everybody. But I think when you're in the Big Ten, I think it helps to get an established head coach, a guy who's already done it at a previous level. Like, at least with Purdue, when they went and got Barry Odom, it was a guy who had coached at UNLV for multiple years. He had coached at Missouri for multiple years. He just happened to be at a lower level, but he at least knew what he was doing and how to run a program. I think UCLA needs to find a guy like that.
Okay. All right. So what's the stat you're going to lead the people with today?
Yeah, I kind of gave one away when it came to the Illinois-Indiana game. Again, the fact that this was just the first time since 1987 that they're hosting the top 10 matchup, but they've only beaten one top 10 team at home, and that came in 1967 against Purdue. And overall, they've been one of the worst teams ever against top 10 teams. They're 6-116-1 all time.
Say that again.
Yeah, they are 6-116-1 against top 10 teams.
Wow.
So a win for Indiana would be historic for multiple reasons.
You know what? That may be the stat of all stats, because I was like, okay, was that a computer? 6-16-1? 160. That's like Washington Generals type of losing.
It really puts into perspective what Curt Cignetti's been able to do in such a short amount of time. The fact that they're favored against a top 10 team in his second year, considering the history that Indiana football has had, it says a lot about what he's done in a short amount of time.
Wow, you ain't kidding. All right, Harold. Big weekend, a little bit of separation. We're going to find out, I think, who goes into that last spot in the Big Ten and the Big Four. Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon already there. But which of these teams will be that fourth team? We'll find out. We'll talk about it later, and we'll be back next week to preview week number 5 in the Big Ten. For Harold Shelton from the Big Ten Network, I'm Rico Beard. Thanks for watching the 5-Star Zone. Keep liking, subscribing, tell your friends. We will be back later on in the week and next week.